Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments, such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org. Before today's episode, an important message. The White House has asked Congress to rescind funding that was already approved for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. That funding supports trusted, independent journalism like the interview you're about to hear. Without it, Idaho Matters could face serious cuts. Learn how you can help protect public media at boisestatepublicradio.org/funding. From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. It's Friday, which means it's time for our Reporter Roundtable. We'll get you updated on the news that made headlines this week. And our panel today includes Nate Eaton, news director at eastidahonews.com, Christina Lords, the editor-in-chief of the Idaho Capital Sun, Caitlin Hart with eastidahonews.com, and Don Day, the founder and editor of boisedev.com. We're going to begin today's conversation with the latest in the saga of Lori Daybell. After only 30 minutes, a jury in Arizona reached a verdict in the latest case against her. It was a quick end to what has been a long and twisted legal journey. Now, over the last few years, we've watched this case unfold from the disappearance of her two children to the revelations about doomsday beliefs, manipulation, and murder. Now, this latest verdict closes the last chapter in a string of trials. And East Idaho News' Nate Eaton has been to every single one of these trials. Nate, nice to have you with us today to talk about the very latest in this case.
Thanks for having me. It has been a long journey, that's for sure.
It certainly has. And Nate, this latest trial was in Arizona. I believe that's where you still are. So what was this latest trial about?
This was a conspiracy to commit murder charge for Lori Vallow's former nephew-in-law. His name is Brandon Boudreaux. He was married to Lori's niece, Melanie, and Melanie was part of the inner circle of Chad and Lori and her brother Alex. Lori decided to represent herself in this trial and her previous trial, so there were definitely some memorable moments, some twists and turns as things progressed, but ultimately, as you mentioned, the jury found her guilty and they did not take much time deliberating.
So, Nate, as you mentioned, this trial didn't last long, I believe about 5 days. Within that 5 days, though, she managed to butt heads with the judge a few times. Can you tell us what happened on day 2 of the trial and the disagreement, I guess, that she and the judge got into?
She did not like this judge. Before the trial even started, she called on him during one hearing to recuse himself, and he said, "I'm not going to recuse myself." She then filed a motion to have him kicked off the case, which was denied by a superior judge who heard it. And then on the first day of trial, of the scheduled jury selection, Lori Vallow Daybell said she was sick and that she could not make it to the courthouse, and the judge had to issue an order demanding that she be taken to the courthouse using any means necessary, including force. And so she showed up in a wheelchair. She said she was very sick. He did give her 2 days to recover, so the trial was pushed back 2 days and ordered a medical evaluation. They said they couldn't really find anything wrong with her. But she continued to call out the judge. And on the second day of the trial, when she started to yell at him or she accused him of yelling at her, he ordered her out of the courtroom and she was removed from the courtroom. We went into recess. When we came back and he told her that if she continued to talk over him, continued to question him or talk over the prosecutor, she would lose her right to represent herself and her advisory attorneys would take over the case.
And Nate, this is the same judge who was in her last trial in Arizona, correct? Who oversaw the last trial?
Yeah, he oversaw the last trial. He has been pretty fair with her, considering she is representing herself and does not have a legal background. He has, in a way, he's told her repeated times, "I cannot give you legal advice," but he's given suggestions along the way to say, you may want to phrase the question this way. Not that he's helping her, but I think just to keep the trial moving. But he clearly had run out of patience with these last few days.
Oh, one of the things that stuck out in this trial, Nate, is that Brandon Boudreaux, the victim in this trial, was able to take the stand. Can you tell us about his testimony?
Yeah, this is the one victim who survived. He was driving home from the
Hmm.
gym on a October morning, 2019, and he turns the corner into his brand new rental house. He had just moved in. Only a handful of people knew the address, and he is shot at with a rifle out of the back window of a Jeep nearby, and it comes within an inch or two of his head, but it hits the car. He's able to call 911, and he recounted the terrifying moments of that morning when he took the stand. He was tearful at times. He was scared for his life. He had to take his kids and go into hiding because he didn't know what would happen next. He had to really get the police on board to investigate. This was long before the JJ and Tylee were missing, long before we knew anything about Chad and Lori Daybell. This was setting it up. They didn't necessarily have to prove a motive in this case, and they didn't really go down that road, the prosecutor. But ultimately, Brandon had a really big life insurance policy. And if he had been shot and killed, his wife, who was close with Chad and Lori, would have gotten all of that money.
And Lori had the opportunity to cross-examine Brandon, correct?
She did. She did. And Brandon told me that was very hard. It was very hard to face her. They, of course, used to have a good relationship before all of this.
Hmm.
They would hang out every week, their families, they'd go on vacations together. But this is a woman that tried to kill him and killed her two children, his niece and nephew. And he was close to them. And not only was it hard to see her, but it was hard because her questions, at least half of them were objected to. She asked things she wasn't legally allowed to ask or go into. But he was on the stand for about 2 to 3 hours and became emotional at time, but stood up and said that he needed to tell his story and tell his version of events.
And Nate, let's go to the last day of the trial. First, there was an FBI agent who testified about things about cell phone location, et cetera. After that wrapped up, then closing arguments happen. And this is when Lori gets emotional. In fact, she starts to cry at a certain point. At the same time, though, she's admonished by the judge a handful of times, and the prosecutor objects to a lot of things that she's saying in her closing argument, which, Nate, I mean, you and I have covered many trials in our time. You don't see a lot of times, opposing counsel objecting during a closing argument. It's kind of a time for each side to kind of wrap up their case, if you will.
Exactly. Yeah, right. Wrap up their case, and the purpose is to address the evidence that was presented during the trial, and that was the issue that Lori started to testify repeatedly and started to say that she was a kind person, a loving person, and the prosecutor said if she's going to start talking about her character, then we're going to open the door and we're going to bring in the fact that she's been convicted of 4 other murders. And the judge
Mm.
had to tell Lori this and outside the presence of the jury several times that if you open this door, it will come in. And during that closing argument, she did begin to testify. She did begin to cry, and the judge repeatedly sustained the objections. I don't know if Lori really cared at that point. She just was reading from her prepared statement, and she ended it by saying that families have tragedies, and this is a time to heal and move forward for everyone, which for Brandon and his family they were a little insulted by that, but not surprised that she would do that. Obviously, the
Hmm.
closing argument did not affect the juries. And in fact, many people have said, many legal experts I've spoken with, that Lori was her own worst enemy, that her representing herself only hurt her.
So, Nate, as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, the jury deliberated for about 30 minutes, and they came back with a guilty verdict. How surprised was everyone that it took them such a short amount of time
It
to
was
render a
very, it was
verdict?
very short. We had heard all along that this was going to be the hardest case because the victim is still living. It's a conspiracy case. That there were a lot of evidence issues that will they be allowed,
Hmm.
won't they? So we thought this one might take the jury the longest. Out of all the trials, this one was the shortest. They got the case Thursday afternoon. They went home pretty fast. Came back Friday morning, and yeah, we had it within 30 minutes. And the jurors were very firm in their decision, and Lori Vallow Daybell has now been convicted of murdering or conspiring to kill 5 people in 2 states, and she will, probably never see the light of day in anywhere.
So, Nate, I know there's been some talk and question about why so many trials. Why have this trial in particular when, as you mentioned, she's already been convicted. She is going to spend the rest of her life behind bars. I, I thought how Brandon answered this question, I believe in a news conference after the verdict, was very interesting. Can you talk a little bit about what he said and why he decided to not just continue with this trial, but to testify? And we should note that Kate Woodcock, if I remember her name correctly,
Woodcock,
correct me
yeah,
if I'm wrong,
Woodcock.
Woodcock. She is JJ's biological grandmother, and she was standing right beside him during this whole time.
She was, as was Lori's oldest son, Colby Ryan. He was there, and Brandon made it clear we are family. Those questions were raised after Lori was sentenced in Idaho to 3 life sentences. Why continue on with Arizona? Why do it?
Mm-hmm.
And the officials have said that this crimes still were committed here, and you still have victims here. And just because someone was convicted in another state, you can't tell the other victims, well, it's already been taken care of. Brandon said that he felt it was his duty to not only make sure justice was served for him, but for those who cannot speak for themselves, JJ, Tylee, Tammy Daybell, Charles, that they haven't been here to speak. He is the only victim left. And so he looked at it more of, you're right, it ultimately, whatever she's sentenced here won't matter because she will return to Idaho and serve those sentences. But he wanted to have this proceed on behalf of them as well as himself.
So before I let you go, Nate, you have been covering this case for upwards of 6 years. I mean, I remember the first time we had you on our program, and I think my jaw could not close because it seemed like it just seemed unreal, right? And this was just the beginning of what we knew about this. What will stay with you as you move forward? I mean, having been just so incredibly immersed in this.
It's so much. I've met a lot of incredible people, the family members of these victims who have really been thrown into this tragedy. They say it's like a bomb's been dropped on their family. I think just the people behind it, and the once again, I've been reminded that when we report these stories, we do these stories, there are real people behind them. And they have real emotions and real feelings, and sometimes those feelings can be complicated. But for the most part, there are pretty good people that just are fighting for justice and fighting for the right thing.
Well, Nate, appreciate all of the reporting you have done over the years. So, Don, a big announcement came from Micron yesterday saying they'll be building a second fabrication plant. It's got a big price tag to go along with it. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, certainly. About a year ago, we actually reported that this was possible, and I forgot that we reported that, to be honest. But Boise Dev's Margaret Carmel has a better memory than I do. And yesterday, the news dropped that Micron will increase its overall spending in the U.S. on expanding manufacturing from about 170 billion with a B to 200 billion. So yesterday's announcement was an announcement of an incremental $30 billion. And the big headline from that for Boise is that they'll build a second, what they call fab, which is a fabrication plant. Construction is already underway on the first fab, and this will essentially double the capacity that they will have out here. It will also mean that domestic-made semiconductor chips from the company will start rolling off the assembly line in 2027. It's the first time we've actually gotten that date from the company. Micron makes the memory that is in devices that you might be listening to us on right now, phones, computers, servers, AI applications, and the like. And they really kind of invented this market in a lot of ways. Founded in Boise in the late 1970s in the basement of a dental office on Ustick Road, and now are a very large company. In the 1990s, a lot of their manufacturing was actually done here in Boise, but most of that now is done around the globe in China, Taiwan, India, and other places. Boise has what they call an R&D fab where they do research and development on new chips. They'll still do R&D in Boise, but then also be able to do production. If you've been out there lately, I know that this is not new news that they're building, but if you've been out there lately, it is a sight to see. Not only are they building currently a new fab, soon to be a second fab, but they're also building an office building that will be one of Idaho's largest when it's complete. And so that site out there is just a hub of activity. We actually, earlier this week, just sort of luck of the draw, have ordered new drone aerial footage that we will have for you next week on Boise Dev. And I'm excited to see it from the air because it is a massive project. Micron sort of strangely wouldn't tell us what the total value of the Boise plant was. It has to do with a federal regulation. We hope to be able to get that answer in a couple of weeks. The previously announced amount for Boise was $15 billion. I noticed about a week ago, the Boise Valley Economic Partnership was claiming that the investment was now $25 billion, but they might have just made that up for all I know. So we hope to get an answer on what that actual investment in the Treasure Valley is, but safe to say that number has gone up significantly from 15 billion, which, by the way, is a very big number.
Yeah. So, Don, one of the things you reported on too is that with this second facility in Idaho, and then there are other plant sites in New York, right? So, as we know, as you said, that a lot of the manufacturing is happening globally, but Micron is now saying almost half of their manufacturing, I mean, once all of these facilities are built in the U.S., will actually happen in the United States?
Yeah, that's what they say. That's what they claim. I mean, one, we don't know how to actually be able to ever tell that. Two, that's off in the distance because construction at the site in upstate New York has not begun yet. We have gone back and forth with our colleagues at the newspaper in Syracuse, and they are definitely frustrated in upstate New York that construction hasn't started there. The total build out there would be larger than what you're seeing here in Boise. They said that they would build, and they were very careful with their phrasing, up to 4 fabs in New York. So that could be 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll see what they actually do, but they haven't started construction there yet. And so as this project starts, the fabrication will come out of Boise. Micron also has a facility in Manassas, Virginia that they plan to do some expansion on. Gemma will remember, I remember Micron, the last time they looked at expansions in the early 2000s, Boise was a candidate and ultimately didn't get that expansion. It went to Virginia.
Yeah.
This time, though, Idaho being the big beneficiary of Micron, well, probably the second biggest because New York's the biggest, but the initial biggest beneficiary of this expansion.
So, Dawn, when is all of this, when's this build out supposed to be up and running in Boise? Do we have a date?
Yeah, so they say that production chips will start rolling off the line in 2027. This is a long-term project, and even when they initially announced this, they said construction would go on through the end of the decade, so up until 2030. Again, they can't answer our question, so I don't know what the timeline will be, if that will go longer. This is a major factor in construction. I've said this on your show before, but we looked at what the value of every single building permit in Boise was from 2008 to 2022. And frankly, a lot of that was Micron expansion. And that total value, so over that 14-year span of everything built in this entire town, was $8 billion. Micron initially said they were going to do $15 billion. I'm going to guess we're looking at somewhere between 25 and 30 billion in a shorter time frame. And that's just Micron. And so you can think about that, like, right, since 2008, what's been built, the Simplot building, and
so much,
tons of housing, and Harris Ranch has been built out, and commercial centers, and all the things that are new around Boise. It pales in comparison to what just Micron is doing. So it gives you a sense of the scale. Yeah,
well, looking forward to that drone video that you'll have coming up.
Me too.
Well. Yeah. So, Christina, let me bring you into the conversation. Idaho's ban on soda and candy for SNAP recipients just got the green light. Can you start by reminding us of what SNAP is?
Yes. So SNAP is essentially what was formerly known as food stamps. So this is folks that go to the grocery store and use these benefits to purchase groceries, other things to feed their families. There's over 100,000 people in Idaho using SNAP benefits today. So, yeah.
Okay, so then how did this ban on soda and candy come about? Because this means basically that if you are a SNAP recipient, you cannot use these benefits to buy soda or candy.
Right. So during the 2025 legislative session that ended in April, Idaho Republican lawmakers passed a bill that would require the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare to submit a waiver to the federal government so that SNAP benefits would not continue to cover candy and soda. And it's important for people to know that this is part of a nationwide trend in Republican states, especially associated with U.S. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Make America Healthy Again movement. So Idaho
Mm-hmm.
wasn't alone in seeking this waiver. And at the same time that Idaho's waiver was announced as approved, the Utah and Arkansas were also granted a similar waiver by the Trump administration. I think there's 6 states that have similar bans like this. So it's a part of a growing trend to try to remove these sort of benefits from candy and soda. And it's important to note that the opponents of this candy and soda ban include retailers who say it may be very difficult to implement due to some of the definitions that are included in these laws. Every state law is a little bit different, and some of these realtors say, not realtors, retailers, excuse me. Some say that those definitions could also ban things like granola bars and bars, and
Mm.
so it's like, how do you really determine what is candy and what is soda? But the Trump administration seems keen to approve these waivers, and these benefits will change for Idahoans. Idaho's law goes into effect on July 1st, so it's a change that's coming really soon.
And what's interesting to me about this, though, Christina, is this MAHA movement in regards to really wanting to control, it seems, what people put into their bodies, right? And then the argument can be made, well, you're getting government assistance, therefore the government should be able to say, well, you can't buy soda or candy with these benefits. You can go, if you have money somewhere else, go buy it, but we shouldn't have to do that, making this assumption that, if you don't have sandy or candy or soda or candy, then you're going to be healthy. Um, and you talk about, retailers. Have we heard from anyone else? Because it's fairly controversial when you really start digging into this.
Yeah, you're right that from the state's perspective, that they're looking at this. The Idaho Department of Health and Welfare Director Alex Adams said, this is about ensuring that public dollars are used to support public health, and by aligning these SNAP benefits with like nutritional goals, they're promoting better outcomes for families. But
Mm-hmm.
Democrats, while this discussion was going on during the legislative session, were essentially saying you're calling out poor people and their decisions when you're a party of limited government and things like that you're punishing people who, for reasons that we can discuss. But the state is basically saying we want a healthier Idaho. We don't think that taxpayer dollars should be going to things that contribute to obesity and other issues. And you have retailers and Democrats pushing back on that and saying we don't think this is fair, and we also don't think that this is doable. And what if, I think Democrats have also said, what if this leads to grocery chains and other, food providers from saying, okay, we're just not going to accept SNAP benefits at all. And then we're, making it so that people don't have any access to food assistance and are worried about the implications of that.
Mm-hmm. Appreciate that update, Christina. Caitlin, in our first segment, we talked with your colleague Nate Eaton about the very latest Lori Daybell case. However, there is some news here in Idaho. Can you tell us about an appeal that's been filed here in the Gem State?
Sure, yeah. So Nate did a great job obviously covering this whole case and the last trial. And so we recently found out that Lori Vallow's appeal has been filed in Idaho for her case where she was found of murdering her 2 children, Tylee Ryan and Joshua Vallow, and conspiring to kill Tammy Daybell, the former wife of her husband, Chad Daybell. Her appellate attorney, Craig Durham, filed the opening brief on the 30th of May, and he argued that she deserves a new trial for um, about 5 reasons. So first, he argued that she was deprived of her Sixth Amendment right to counsel of her choice, and that was based off when the district court disqualified her retained attorney.
Hmm.
She was also, according to them, deprived of her Sixth Amendment right to the assistance of counsel during pretrial hearings, based on the state's motion to disqualify her counsel after the district court denied her attorney's request to participate in those hearings. She was also deprived, allegedly, of her right to due process under the 14th Amendment. When the district court held pretrial hearings that they say affected her rights in her absence and while she was deemed incompetent during that first trial. They also said that the district court erred in allowing the state to introduce evidence of uncharged bad acts from her Arizona cases into the Idaho criminal trial under Rule 404B of the Idaho Rules of Evidence. And then the last kind of big point that they make is that they claim that the district court erred in denying her motion to dismiss based on a violation of her statutory and constitutional rights to a speedy trial. It's a really long appeal. It's actually a 64-page opening
Oh.
brief that we have attached to our story on eastsidenews.com if you would like to go read that.
And so, Caitlin, you said that this brief was filed on May 30th. So we're just now waiting to see what happens next, if she will be granted a new trial or not.
Right. We're just waiting. The appellate process can be really long, as I'm sure a lot
Yeah.
of people know. So at this point, we're just waiting to see if a judge takes it and allows her to have a new trial. But that could be years from now. But we'll keep following it and update if we hear that anything happens.
So, Christina, fire officials have made their predictions for Idaho's wildfire season, and they are saying it could be above average. So, can you talk to us about what the folks at the National Interagency Fire Center are predicting? And we should note that NIFC is based in Boise. Can we start with what they've said about North Idaho?
Yes. So, yeah, I agree that we're very fortunate to have NIFC right here in our backyard.
Mm-hmm.
And the center, just so people know, is the main planning hub for all wildfire response in the United States. And there's an office specifically in NIFC that predicts where wildfires are likely to occur and when. And we're apparently already seeing the chance for significant wildfire activity in North Idaho this month. And that will extend to southern Idaho in July through September. So already, I don't know if people have been paying attention to the Canadian wildfires. There's been a lot of activity north of us, and North Idaho is looking particularly dry and hot for this part of the season.
Okay, so you mentioned Southwest Idaho. So can we talk a little bit more about that? So what they've said is that we need to keep an eye on things, not just in southern Idaho, but central Idaho, right? Really
Right,
beginning
everywhere.
in
Yeah.
July.
And
Yeah,
it's, I
everywhere.
think people are kind of surprised by this because we did have really good snowpack throughout the state this year. Our
Yeah.
reservoirs are very full. But because it's been so hot and dry lately, all of that snowpack melted off really rapidly. And that's not unique to Idaho. We have states newsroom outlets in other states, and I've been following their coverage. And the same thing is happening in Utah. The same thing is happening in Montana, where there was all this snowpack, but it dried up and melted off very, very quickly. And so that could lead to more significant wildfires this summer. And then the other thing that we've been asking about at the Capitol Sun is like, what is our personnel response look like to another bad wildfire season? And so Idaho Department of Lands Director Dustin Miller told us that the state has hired actually more firefighters than last year, but it's the type of firefighters that he's most concerned with, along with all of the federal response and all of the changes and cuts that have come from DOGE and the Trump administration. So Miller told us that he's most concerned about not having enough senior wildfire personnel, that he's worried about the state's ability to hire and retain those mid to upper level management engine captains in Idaho. And so he says because they've been having trouble hiring those kinds of like senior positions, the Idaho Department of Lands will only be able to staff 50% of the engines with 7 days a week 7 days per week coverage. So that's what's happening on the state level. But then there's the issue of what's going on at the federal level due to the Trump administration. And Miller said that the U.S. Forest Service has said that the state can expect the same level of initial attack resources, but there actually may be less of the support staff to help coordinate the federal response due to these employee buyouts and other federal cuts. And so I think it remains to be seen how this is all going to work. I think we tend to focus on Idaho in our reporting and things like that, but fire response is a national thing. If firefighting responses spread thin everywhere, it can really affect how we respond to large fires, which ones we let burn and which ones we, really focus on with our attacks and things like that. So I know there's a lot of people concerned about this fire season with some of the stuff that's been happening at the federal level, and it looks like our weather conditions are not really helping with any of that.
And Christina, I mean, one of the things we should note that you mentioned, right, is where are these firefighters being deployed, right? Because
Right.
When you look at this map that you put up in the article that you reported on, I mean, the West Coast is basically all red, but then there are
Right.
other parts, right?
Right.
And
It's almost all of Washington, almost all of the panhandle of Idaho down through Twin Falls, all of western Montana,
Oregon.
most of California, a huge chunk of Oregon, and then we've got the top of Minnesota that's really hot and dry, and then of course like most of Texas. And so at some point you really are trying to determine how to respond to all of this. And it just feels like, I'm a lifelong Idahoan. It just feels like our summers, the smoke and all of that, it just feels like it's worse and worse every year. It feels like when I was younger, we would have a bad fire season like every third or fourth year. And now it just feels like every year it's significant, and we need to be very, very careful how we're treating our public lands and how we're, contributing to that. A lot of our fires over the last 2 years have been human caused, because people are not putting out their campfires and things like that. There's so much we can do to help our firefighters out to make the situation more manageable.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that. If everyone wants to read more, make sure you go to that Idaho Capital Sun and read the latest on that. With that said, Don, your Margaret Carmel recently reported on the city of Boise's preservation of lands and actually how it's nearing an end. Can you talk to us about this levy that was passed back in 2015 and what it's done in this decade?
Yeah, the levy was actually passed twice back in 2015. If you recall, the city of Boise put it to a vote, and under former mayor Dave Beater, they didn't do it right, so they had to vote for it again. And
That's
people of
right.
Boise liked it so much. I know that wasn't in our story, but I just remembered that.
I'm like, that's right. I remember now.
Yeah. I was like, wait, you did what? We got to do this again? But the people of Boise liked it so much that they voted twice to approve it. It was actually the second one. So this goes back to the early 2000s. Then Boise Mayor Brett Coles and some of the members of the city council saw an opportunity to raise funds from taxpayers of the city of Boise to help purchase and preserve, at the time, primarily foothills open space. In 2015, Mayor Dave Beater, with the funds nearing an end, thought that was a good program, put it up for the voters to choose, and then again to choose. And they said, yeah, we like this, and put another $10 million. And this program has done a number of things. It's bought land in the foothills. It's built a wildlife underpass, actually in Boise County, because that's part of our kind of the feed for the Boise area. It built the staircase at Ann Morrison Park, and a number of other things. So the city now says that these purchases have actually had kind of a multiplier effect and have helped them to, put a little bit of cash towards something and then get some trade. During the pandemic a few years ago, the Little family, as in Governor Brad Little, sold some land in the foothills to the city, and part of that was a donation. And so the city said this has been a great catalyst for them to be able to preserve open space and do some other projects. During the presentation this week, the current council, who interestingly, none of them were involved in the 2015 levy because they're all fairly recently elected to the council, with the exception of Mayor McLean, who was on the the city council at the time, and cut her teeth in Boise politics in working for Mayor Coles back in the early 2000s, helping to get the original levy passed. So the council said to the mayor, hey, we'd like to see a proposal and maybe look at doing another levy so that we can have more dollars to spend. The city of Boise has a very large budget. It's grown in recent years. Your property taxes have seen increases, and the city has increased its personnel and has, I'm just going to say, spends quite a bit of money. And they are now feeling some challenges in that. And a lot of that has to do with legislation coming out of the State House. And but one thing that they do have the ability to do is go to the voters and say, hey, do you want to give us some money for this specific piece? I would suspect that we'll see that here in the next probably, I guess it could be this fall. It seems a little fast, but maybe in the next year or two, where there's another vote to say, hey, do you want to continue this levy so that we can help preserve foothills and open space land around the area?
Well, I mean, because Don, I think that's one of the things that makes Boise unique, right? When you go to other cities, you don't tend to see as much open space in foothills. What you see are homes, usually very large homes, right? That's what you tend to see. Yes, we have that in certain parts, but we do have a lot of open space in the foothills. So I would not be surprised if we see a levy, because this has been so significant in the development of the city over the last, almost 20 years, going back to Mayor Coles.
Yeah, and I think that the city, from 2001 to now has definitely moved in a more progressive direction. Obviously, Brett Coles was a Republican mayor, and the city council was largely, it's a nonpartisan race, but he is a Republican. And the city at that time, which was probably more conservative than it is today, said, yeah, we like open space. We like the foothills. We like trails. We like, and did that. And certainly the city has continued to move further left politically. So I do think that that's probably a popular thing, especially as you've seen some of the national federal movement towards potentially making changes in the ownership of federal land. I think you would probably see the city of Boise's voters vote to approve that. That's just a guess. You never know what'll happen. But
True.
We'll see, and it'll go to the voters and they'll decide.
Yeah. Caitlin, multiple rallies are planned for tomorrow all over the country, protesting the military parade in D.C. These protests are called No Kings protests, including a big one that's scheduled at the Idaho State Capitol. However, that is not the only place in Idaho where folks will be gathering. Can you talk to us about what's being planned for East Idaho, where you are?
Right. Yeah. So we know that they're supposed to be all over the country tomorrow. These No Kings protests are going to be held across Eastern Idaho as well. We know that there's going to be one in Idaho Falls at the Broadway Bridge. There's going to be one in Pocatello, and then there's also going to be one in Driggs. And I think there are going to be 14 total across Idaho, just the state alone. So one of my coworkers, Logan Ramsey, talked to an organizer with the Southeast Idaho Citizens for Democracy, who's going to be organizing the Pocatello protest event, who said that, protesting is for them the foundation of our country, and that's why they feel as they're protesting against the Trump administration on his birthday, when the military parade is supposed to happen in Washington, D.C. tomorrow. The military parade is going to actually be the last day of this week-long celebration of the U.S. Army's 250th birthday, which also just kind of happens to coincide with the president's birthday. But there's going to be a ton, so we will be covering those tomorrow. We also heard about a counter protest, at least one in Idaho Falls tomorrow, that we will be covering as well. Just in case anybody's curious, the one in Pocatello is going to be held at Caldwell Park, and the one in Driggs is at the intersection of East Little Avenue and North Main Street tomorrow.
Dawn, another building and parking garage is taking shape in downtown Boise. Can you tell us about this one? Because I don't know about you, I cannot keep all this straight, because it seems like the building doesn't stop.
It does seem that way. The Capital City Development Corporation plans to build a 7.5-story garage and retail building right behind the new YMCA facility, which is being built on State Street, right across from the current YMCA building.
YMCA.
Yeah, a lot of YMCA here. They initially had planned to build a tall, like 20-story building with parking and a senior living facility, as well as a number of other developments in the area. That didn't come together due to economic conditions, but CCDC and the Y, the YMCA needed parking for the new facility, and CCDC has been working to do that, not just for the Y, but for other users in the area. Their idea here is that by building a parking garage, they can catalyze development in the area because some of the surface parking lots that are there could be developed into other uses, and the cars could then move to the parking garage. So they're looking at building about 500 spaces here. The ground floor would include a YMCA early child learning center, or a daycare, as most folks call it, as well as some retail space that could be a restaurant or a store or a couple things like that, like a boutique. And they planned some unique features, including a potential lookout to the Capitol, because it's got a neat view of the Capitol from that site, and also solar panels on the roof and some other things. So this is just kind of starting to work through. We'll know more this summer on the timeline, but I think they're hoping to have this built and up here in the next year or so.
Wow. Okay. Appreciate that update. Christina, Idaho's public lands are really in a precarious position right now. This comes as Utah Senator Mike Lee is working on a plan as part of the, quote, big, beautiful bill that would mandate the sale of more than 3 million acres of Idaho public lands. But Christina, tell us about what happened earlier this week, because I think it's fair to say so many groups are speaking out against this.
Right. This is a fast moving issue. I feel like when I pitched this story yesterday, it has changed today. So
it has. Yeah.
Over 100 organizations, 113 groups across the country, mostly environmentally focused groups like the Idaho Conservation League, signed a letter urging U.S. senators to not include proposals to sell public land to help pay for the Republicans' reconciliation and spending bill. They're making the case that our public land should be protected in perpetuity, and that these sales would not or should not help the offset of these tax cuts that largely benefit wealthy Americans. And so this letter came out as this news was getting out that U.S. Senator Mike Lee, who's a Republican from Utah, was going to propose to bring back an effort to make these land sales after his first proposal on this was taken out of that big bill. So Lee has indeed come out with this new proposal that is actually much broader than the first that was shot down. His first proposal largely focused on selling public lands in Utah and Nevada. But this new proposal that he dropped this week actually proposes that the U.S. Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management sell an overall percentage of acres of public land from 11 states, including Utah and Idaho, and it largely focuses on other public lands in the West. And so according to Senator Lee's new amendment, the U.S. Forest Service and the BLM would be required to dispose of between 0.5% and 0.75% of the lands they manage, which doesn't seem like a big percentage, but amounts to about 2.2 million to 3.3 million acres. And the state and local governments would be allowed to nominate parcels of land under this proposal. So this was met with swift backlash from environmental groups and Democrats who argue that once these lands are sold for housing and development, which is what Lee is proposing, that they'll never be able to be pulled back into federal protection. And I think that we'll just see continued protests. We've seen protests here in Boise about selling off public lands. Utah has had massive protests. Colorado has. So I think that where this proposal is kind of even more drastic than Lee's original proposal, I think there will be a lot of people speaking out on this one.
Yeah, and we need to wrap up very quickly, Christina. We should note that our representative Mike Simpson has come on board against this plan, correct?
Right. He was the only member of the Idaho congressional delegation to vote to protect public lands as this discussion has been happening through this reconciliation, this big, beautiful bill process. Our senators, both Jim Risch and Mike Crapo and Russ Fulcher have signed off on this proposal.
Okay, well, we appreciate all of that. And as Christina said, this has been fast moving and there will continue to be developments. So all of our organizations, of course, will be following it. A big thank you to all of you for joining us today. Our panel today, Nate Eaton, news director at EastIdahoNews.com, Christina Lords, the editor-in-chief of the Idaho Capital Sun, Caitlin Hart with EastIdahoNews.com, and Dawn Day, the founder and editor of BoiseDev.com. I'm Gemma Gaudette, and this is Idaho Matters.
Planet Money helps you understand the economy. We find the people at the center of the story.
Garbage in New York, that was like a controlled substance.
We show you how money influences everything.
Tell me what you like by telling me how you spend your money.
And we dig until we get answers.
I had a bad feeling you're going to bring that up.
Planet Money finds out. All you have to do is listen. The Planet Money Podcast from NPR.